Welcome to the Child Free Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, Certified Financial Planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast. Welcome to the Child Free Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, Certified Financial Planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
Hey, Child Free Wealth listeners. Today we have one of my good friends, Cody Garrett, coming on, and he was last on about 2 years ago now, talking about what DIYers forget. And that's kind of his thing. He works with DIYers as an advice-only planner, but he talks about like how you can do this yourself. And he's got a new book out. So his new book, I got it in hand here. He sent me an early copy. He didn't sign it, so I will judge him on that. But it's called Tax Planning to and Through Early Retirement. So we're going to get pretty nerdy about taxes for folks that want to kind of have a better understanding themselves and work it through. Now, we will do our best to try to use regular language. And let's be real, with taxes, it's always one of those challenges like, what did you mean? So we'll try to call each other out if we're using terms that don't make any sense. But what you're going to find is that Cody is really good at explaining some of these concepts. And I read his book and I think, 95% I agree. And by the way, on taxes, if you agree on 90%, you agree on everything. Like you're really close. But we'll play with it. So, Cody, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's funny that you mentioned the agreeing on things. I actually wrote that book with a co-author. And as you can imagine, like sometimes that can be difficult, right? Like writing with, like, again, you might agree with 95%, but there's like the 5% of variability in, our own biases and our own history with money. And one thing we put in the book for that purpose is Cody's takes versus Sean takes. There's Sean and my co-author. We make sure, hey, if there's something that like we disagree on, or I think there's a best practice versus his best practice, making sure that we're all heard and understood along the way.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is people look at like taxes and go, oh, it's black and white, it's in the code or not. And I'm like, nope, there's a heck of a lot of gray of like, well, I have this assumption and this is how I want to go with it. And I think this is what fits. And I think that's a challenge when you're trying to figure out your own tax plan. Does that make any sense, Cody?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key topics that, one of the concepts in the book we talk about is, especially in retirement, trying to keep income low. Like, or at least try to maintain your lifestyle with the least amount of, taxable income as possible. And some people go, but I have a pension, right? Or I was in the military, I have a pension, or, I worked as a teacher, I have a pension. None of these strategies and tactics apply to me, right? And I'll just say that we try to cover in the book, lots of what about me scenarios, but it's very difficult. As you mentioned, keep finance personal is one of my trademarks that, everybody's coming in with a different, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, like what do they value? Like, what's unique to them? Like charitable giving, right? Charitable giving doesn't necessarily all have to mean deductible charitable giving. There's lots of ways to give to charity with your time, energy, financial resources, right? So again, I think, most people who read the book, they'll be like, hey, I get 95%, but the 5% of me is not in the book. So I'll definitely just say that now, you won't find yourself perfectly in the book. And if you do, that's a very rare thing to happen.
Yeah. And we're going to go through some of the basics, and then I'm going to force Cody to go back and we're going to have a conversation about what happens if you're a soloist and also some of the weird quirks that happen when you're child free. Because there's just some basic assumptions that work for everybody, but then there's but. And I like the one I like the one you're talking about with pensions. So are you officially Gen Xer or millennial?
I'm a millennial. I'm in my, I was born in 88.
All right. So I'm a Gen Xer. And the Gen Xers are the first generation to really essentially not have a pension. It's the 401k experiment. And
right.
I call it the experiment because we don't really know how it's going to work out. But it's a great example. If you're one of the few, your teacher, your public service, you have a pension, you're right. That's going to change things. But for many, it's not. So that's where we're going to have some of those discussions. So one of the things I want to start with is kind of a general philosophy and how this works. So we always talk about keeping your finances simple so your life can be amazing. And the way I look at it is investing can be super simple. I mean, 3 fund portfolios, set it, forget it, not a big deal. Tax planning takes a bit more thought. And you and I, we were at a conference, what was it, a couple weeks ago, and I was like, Cody, I like what you're going with the book. The hard part is there is a balance between what you can do yourself and where you need a professional. Right. How do you look at kind of like, to me, I don't want people to be scared of taxes, and you talk about that in your book, but like you also have to know when to ask for help. Does that make any sense?
That's right. Yeah. In the book, we specifically say that an educated consumer actually gets the most value out of working with a professional. That I really do believe that, some of the book is focused on teaching people what they should have been learned, should have been taught. Again, we don't know who to blame about this, but chapter 1 is literally showing step by step, like, how do you read a tax return? Again, this is something that we're all filing tax returns. If you're, an employee, retired, whatever, you've probably filed a tax return, but none of us really learn how to read it, right? Like, again, unless you're, going back to like the past generations where you had to do it by hand, most are using maybe TurboTax, maybe using a CPA. You even call them their CPA, even if they don't have a CPA designation. We wanted to make sure there was a fundamental education of how various income sources are taxed or not taxed, right? And I think, I really believe there's a big difference between education and advice. So in the book, really, this is fundamental education. This is all stuff, by the way. Like, there's nothing in here that's like, there's no wizard, Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain. This is all just, hey, this is all the stuff you can find in various places, but we all smushed it into a 350-page book with a bibliography is about 30 of those pages. So yeah, I really do believe that everybody should try to get a fundamental education on how taxes work. And then when you go, I think, again, if you don't have the time, temperament, and talent, the 3 T's of doing all that yourself, again, as you mentioned, investing can be, somewhat simple, at least in the selection of what you invest in. But, which ones you sell, like when you claim Social Security, which account do I pull from and which order, how do I reduce my lifetime tax liability, not just my, annual tax liability? Those can get complicated even for professionals. And I think that if you were to, again, whether it's this book or other resources, if you have a fundamental education about tax planning and retirement planning, when you go seek out and you go interview that prospective financial planner, financial advisor, you're going to have a pretty good glimpse at, first of all, how they can help you. But second, do they actually know what they're talking about? So I would say a lot of the readers of this book are actually financial planners who are trying to tighten their own knowledge. So I think if you were to go through this book as a non-advisor and you understand 95% of what's in there, I think if you were to go work with a financial planner, you're going to ask much clearer questions and also be able to identify if they're really the right professional for you in terms of their expertise.
Yeah, actually, in full transparency, we've picked this book up. So each month with our child free wealth specialist, we kind of dive into a topic. We've talked about, long-term care and different issues. And this month we're talking about taxes. We said, all right, let's use Cody's book as a framework. Let's just talk through it and see if there's anything in here that changes some of our assumptions or changes some of what our principles are, or, hey, is this good feedback? And it's a good refresher. Now, I will tell you, if you are going to read Cody's book, you got to be kind of a bit of a finance nerd, no matter what. Like, this is not like, hey, it's like a murder mystery thriller that's going to keep you on the
choose your own adventure.
Yeah. I mean, but we can go there. So let's talk about a few things, and I'm going to pick a couple issues. I'm picking randomly out of the book, but
sure.
We'll play with it because we can pick with anything. Like with taxes, you pick one topic, it's always related to another. Right. It's
circular, which makes it difficult. Yeah.
So one of the discussions we've been having with our child free wealth team, so I'll bring it out and we can have it here, is the combination between asset location and drawdown strategies.
Right.
And let's start with asset location. So you guys dive in to an asset location that gets very similar to where we're at, but you use yield to pick kind of where to put your assets. Talk to me about this. And by the way, for everybody that's listening, we tend to recommend a 3-fund portfolio. Cody talks about the same type of thing, the U.S. stock, international stocks, and some bonds. So we're going to be talking about that as an example. And we're going to be talking about taxable brokerages versus tax advantage being your IRAs, 401ks, things like that, which this is kind of the basics. We're not going to be talking about, hey, I've bought, 17 crypto things and where do I, like, no, we're not talking about any of that fancy stuff. We're talking about basic kind of 3-fund portfolio and location. So talk to me about location of assets.
Yeah. So first off, that's how I invest. I'm a low cost index fund investor, U.S. equity, foreign equity, which is non-U.S., And then, you have that those together make your global equity. And you can kind of choose your tilts on how much U.S. versus foreign, but U.S. foreign equity, those are stocks, ownership in companies, and then bonds is the third. So keeping that simple, there's a concept of, hey, especially moving into retirement. Let's assume, again, your listeners may or may not be on the path to or through retirement, but I would say that these actually apply to most people. So most people have, stocks and bonds. By the way, your bonds in this conversation also includes your cash, right? So your cash that's maybe in your checking and savings accounts is included in what I call, fixed income or bonds. So each of these are paying different types of income to you. So your U.S. stocks and your foreign stocks are going to be paying dividends, which is kind of like a profit share of those companies. When when they're profitable, they share that profit with shareholders. So you might receive a dividend. Most U.S. companies are going to pay what's called a qualified dividend. So nothing special about that, except that qualified dividends to U.S. taxpayers are taxed at a lower tax rate than non-qualified dividends. And you say, what's a non-qualified dividend? It's really anything that's not a qualified dividend. So
it's a circular argument. It's like you've held it for a while. It becomes qualified essentially, but there's a bit more to it.
That's right. So so think about just on average, U.S. companies are paying qualified dividends, which are taxed at lower tax rates. So you say, okay, well, if they're paying, if they're giving me favorable taxation on that, I probably want those in my accounts that I can actually receive that favorable taxation. And on the base level, that's your taxable brokerage account typically, which again, you have your checking, savings, taxable brokerage accounts at Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, wherever you have your assets. So then we have foreign equity, right? And some people say, hey, well, I'm just going to keep all my stocks, in these same accounts. So foreign equity, yes, they're also going to pay dividends. Right now, foreign stocks on average generally are paying higher dividend yield. So they're paying out a higher percentage, right, of their share price as a dividend. But a lot of foreign companies are paying, those are known as non-qualified dividends. So these, just for basics, just know that these non-qualified dividends are taxed just like ordinary income from like your W-2 job as an employee, your net, rental real estate, maybe your net self-employment income. So think about there's ordinary rates, which are considered, unfavorable tax rates because they're the highest tax rates that you can have. And then there's qualified, your long-term capital gains tax rates that are taxed favorably. So in terms of the stocks, if we were to kind of say, if I have equal amounts of money in my taxable, my pre-tax and tax-free accounts, so taxable being checking, savings, taxable brokerage, pre-tax being my traditional IRAs, traditional 401ks, 403bs, 457s, all the alphabet soup. And then my tax-free accounts, my HSAs, my Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, if I'm holding stocks and bonds, where should I put those? Right. So we talked about the stocks being qualified and non-qualified. So, if you could have them all equally, we want to prioritize keeping our, this is just general education, not advice, keeping our U.S. stocks in our taxable brokerage accounts so that we can receive not only lower yield. So, while we're working, we typically don't need to take money out of our investment accounts. So if we don't need income, we want to keep the lowest income assets in those accounts typically. So those are in your taxable account. The foreign equity, you might have those maybe in a variety, but those are spitting off higher yield percentages. And also more of those dividends are non-qualified. So we say, hey, is there a possibility to keep those foreign equity in different types of accounts? Maybe the pre-tax or the Roth accounts. And then lastly, bonds, right? So as I mentioned earlier, most people who are working do not actually need to pull income from their investment accounts. At least, they might plan to when they retire. But along the way, if you're receiving interest payments, even in your checking account, your savings account, high yield savings, and from those bonds in your taxable brokerage, you're receiving income that's being taxed at the highest tax rates for you when you don't actually need the money, right? So what can you do to kind of shield yourself from that annual interest income that you don't even need to live? What you might do is, not actually transferring money between these accounts, but buying these bonds within your pre-tax accounts. So these are accounts that most likely you're not going to touch these until you retire, maybe whether you're 50, 60, 70, et cetera. And along the way, as you're receiving that bond interest income or they're considered non-qualified dividends from those mutual funds and ETFs that are, the bond ETFs, we'd rather have that income being thrown off in what's called a tax deferred account, which means you're not taxed along the way. It's just, that interest is hopefully auto reinvested to buy more investments within your pre-tax accounts. And then when you retire, it's kind of funny that while you're working and when you're retired, these asset location principles remain the same. They're just going back to the general framework, since there's a lot there and, drying out my throat talking about it, that typically we want our equities and our taxable brokerage accounts and our Roth IRAs, and we typically want our bonds sitting in our pre-tax accounts. But one thing I'll just mention, I think you're going to go here, is that there's a difference between tax optimization and really flexibility, like liquidity and stability. Let's say, while working, if you're saving up to buy a house next year, most likely you're not going to be investing that money in stocks, right? Because, stocks are volatile over short periods of time. I might be building up $100,000 in my high yield savings account to save up for a house down payment. But then you read the book and you're like, hey, wait a minute. Sean says to keep these, to keep that high interest, that fixed income in my pre-tax accounts. But you're not buying the house. You're not putting down the down payment by taking money out of your pre-tax account, right? So I think there's understanding asset location as a principle, a tactic, and then stepping back and saying, wait a minute, what is this money actually going to be used for? There's a concept I use, I say, which is give every dollar a job and a use by date. So before we go into all the tax optimization, asset location plays and tactics, we first have to understand, what is this money going to be used for, and when do I plan to spend this money? So I think that you can combine these concepts, especially for people who have, that fundamental education about, even though I'm taking money out of my taxable brokerage account and selling stocks, to do that, I can still be keeping my kind of fungibly, I can be keeping my bonds and other types of accounts. That's more like advanced complex thinking. But I think on the base level, most people are going to be taking money out of the accounts that they want to keep the most stable and liquid. So just keep in mind, I know I just said a lot there, but keep in mind that tax optimization is not going to make or break your retirement planning. Like nobody has a successful retirement or isn't able to retire just because they didn't take advantage of these unique tactics like asset location. So you go ahead, Jay, pick it apart.
Yeah, and by the way, I would argue that once we take into account state taxes, and if you actually are going to move states, it could have a 10% difference on your amount of money you can take out in retirement, tax location, and where you're doing your high allocation of your investments, what you use when. It can have something like a 10% difference. Now, by the way, that's not make or break, but that is a kind of quality of living. Right. So this tax planning is important, but
it kind of enhances what you already have. It doesn't make or break, but it enhances what you're doing. Yeah.
Right. It gives you a little cushion. And by the way, it's essentially like you're making extra money on your investments by doing this tax stuff. It's kind of how it works. Now, here's where I'm going to kind of pick it at Cody. And by the way, this is where one of the issues of being an author is you put it in a book and then you have to back it up.
Right.
I'm going to do a war between Cody's book and anyone who's read The Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. We have a slightly different asset location structure. And let me talk about this, but here's the thing. Cody and I are now going to have a little bit of discussion about this, and we're really fighting over about maybe 1 or 2% different. I mean, not enough to make a difference. I want to show you we've got a slightly different opinion, but it almost does not matter. And here's where I'm going to differ with you, Cody. I'm saying I put my international in the brokerage first because I want that international tax credit, and I think it offsets the difference in the dividends. Now, by the way, math-wise, really almost doesn't matter. This is that return on hassle question. Mm-hmm. But talk to me. I mean, you're saying, all right, we do the U.S. first, then and by the way, for most clients, it's going to make no difference whatsoever. But talk about international in the brokerage versus not.
Yeah, so this is actually, I'm going to kind of jump here. It's actually in chapter 18 of the book on asset location. Actually, Sean Mullaney, my co-author, actually did the math behind kind of is, missing out on the foreign tax credit. It's one of those things hey, if I have this in my pre-tax account, I don't get that foreign tax credit that I'd get if it were held in my brokerage account. And again, that's actually, I'm not gonna push it to Sean here, but I will say on average, the math behind it, he said really the kind of the, foregoing that foreign tax credit starts not to make sense in the higher tax brackets. So, and I would say too, Jay, if you're talking about, Dr. Jay, if you're talking about, a lot of the examples are in the book are, married couples, because we also want to kind of figure out what happens when a married couple becomes, a surviving widow or widower. But especially if you're talking about single workers, right, making, a few $100,000 a year, they're jumping up into those 24, 32, 35% marginal brackets. That's where, foregoing the the foreign tax credit, like you got to really measure twice on that. So I would say on average, like for the lower income earner, that foreign tax credit's not going to be as much of a big deal for them. But if you're getting into like the 32 plus brackets, which you get there pretty quickly as a single filer, right? Or, again, those widowers or just single filers throughout your working careers, that's where you really need to judge that. And I would say on average, though, when you think about the average worker investing, they might have, let's say, 80% to 100% stock, right, in their total portfolio. So, while you're working, you're saying, hey, like, if I have, let's say, again, these three different account types, taxable, pre-tax, tax-free, and I'm going to fill up my total asset allocation of, let's say, 80% stock, 20% bonds, you're most likely going to be able to put all your bonds in your pre-tax accounts and say, okay, where do I put the rest? And on average, like you said, Jay, like even if you have U.S. and foreign equity just mirrored across your accounts, like you're not going to be like that worse off. But I think you're right that the foreign tax credit, that's like the one little like tighten the screw in the last 5% of your analysis. That if you're in like, I would say just generally, if you're in like the 12% marginal bracket or lower, right? So that's actually kind of like lower, like maybe like lower like median household income for married or single. I know single it gets over the 12% pretty quickly, but if you're in like the 12% or lower, like the foreign tax credit, again, even though like a tax credit is a dollar for dollar reduction of taxes paid, it's probably not going to be like a meaningful difference, especially considering maybe how much you're even able to invest, right, at those lower brackets. Like, how much non-qualified dividends are you really receiving for somebody who's in like the 10%, 12% bracket in investing versus somebody who's in the 32? They're probably able to invest a lot more into those taxable brokerage accounts and naturally get more benefit from that foreign tax credit. So I know I've kind of gone roundabout here, but I do think the foreign tax credit is a consideration. For myself and clients I serve, simplicity is often prioritized over this tax optimization play, especially with the equity that say, hey, maybe we'll just own one fund that's a global equity fund and we'll just own it in on our taxable brokerage account rather than trying to split up and, what I call create a Humpty Dumpty portfolio. Let's turn a single, what we could buy as a single mutual fund or ETF and split it into 10 different, specialized funds for tax location purposes.
Hey, Child Free Wealth listeners, it's Bree. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, be sure to get on it, where each week we send out information regarding what's going on in the world of child-free life and finances. You can sign up by finding the link in our description.
Yeah, and so I want to kind of pick at this because this is a really good example of the difference between child-free and not. So I actually just did a post on LinkedIn kind of poking at financial planners and saying, hey, if you're serving child-free people and you're not adjusting your plan to meet them, you're not meeting the fiduciary need. You're not doing your fiduciary duty. And now this sounds like small, but let's just kind of walk through this. So 80% of our followers in the podcast are women. And if you look at women in particular, the gender wage gap disappears for child-free couples as compared to parents. It's almost gone. It's like $160 a month on median income. And you see actually the highest net worth, not by much, it's not significantly significant, is single childless women. So if you're talking about, and my book's written for childless folks, written for folks that are soloists, the focus, about 1/3 of child-free soloists. Okay, that's why I picked that model. And you just back that up completely. Now, the reality check is it's not a huge difference. Like this is kind of worth the hassle versus not. But these are the small things that change that we don't always think about. Now, let me ask you a different question, Cody, because this is another one we kind of we've been having to go around on this one. All right, so I do the asset allocation, whether the international is in the brokerage or not, like we're still equities are in the brokerage.
Right.
And now I go into retirement and I need to pull money out. And your book says pull from taxable first, and I agree. The pushback I get is, well, but then I might be selling equities in a down market.
Right.
And my thing on that is it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like if it's down really, you get a tax loss harvesting. But it's like a behavioral thing that we've been taught, hey, you can't sell in a down market. And I'm like, there's no reason financially why you can't sell in a down market. Are you with me? Like, am I losing my mind here?
Yeah, this is a very common thing. I'm working with a client through this concept of I'm setting up my retirement spending plan. I'm going to take money from different accounts. they're saying, okay, well, but when the stock market crashes, let's say 30%, they're like, but you're telling me to sell my stocks when they're low? And I say, yes, but from a tax standpoint, not from an investment. This is not a timing the market. You know how we always talk about, buy low, sell high, right? If the stock market crashes by 30% and I'm telling them to sell stock, they're like, I'm selling low. You're telling me to do the opposite of what you told me. But what they're actually doing is they're selling low from a tax optimization standpoint, meaning when stocks crash by 30%, that gives you an opportunity to, one, have lower realized capital gains. So you have less of that share that you're selling is gain. Also, you might even have losses from a tax perspective. That's the silver lining of the market going down. People saw this in 2022 with bonds of saying, oh my gosh, my bonds went down in value. Ironically, that would have been a good time to have bonds in the taxable brokerage account. But yeah, when you can actually say, hey, if I'm able to sell these at a loss, that realized loss can offset other realized capital gains, but also I can take up to $3,000 of that realized net loss against other income each year, which again, $3,000 isn't like a big amount of money, but in terms of kind of tightening the screws on tactics, again, if you want lower income in retirement, it's actually great to sell things that are down. But what I would say there, this is the concept that kind of takes it around the world, is that even though you're selling stocks low, right, or lower, when you do that in retirement, you can still reallocate your total asset allocation across your other accounts. So let's say that the market crashes 30%. I sell stocks low. Right after I sell those, low in my taxable brokerage account, I can go into my pre-tax and Roth accounts and rebalance those accounts without any tax consequences to get my total asset allocation back up to whatever I wanted it to be, 70-30, 80-20, et cetera. So it really does it's really a mental hurdle that really takes more fundamental education and also really experimenting, and really it takes a few times doing this to be like, oh, I get it. Even though I'm taking money out of this account, I'm actually the money that I'm taking out is actually invested in this other account. And it just takes stepping back and then going in and stepping back. It takes a few rounds to really understand that selling low from a tax optimization play is different from selling low in I'm scared of the market, I'm getting out of the market. So those are two different concepts that sometimes are difficult to unbundle together.
Yeah. And by the way, this is where working with a certified financial planner or CPA can help you, because it kind of saves you from yourself. So if you're selling because you're panicking and getting out of the market, that's not a tax play.
Yeah,
we don't do that. Yeah. If you're selling because you need to fund your expenses for the next year and the market is down, perfect. That's the difference. And when we're talking about simple, passive, long-term investing, if you've been doing that, so, you're in your 40s, you buy the 3 funds, you set and forget it. We're now in our early 50s and we're going into retirement. It's been there long enough that it's probably up anyway.
If it doesn't actually get down, right? Yeah.
Yeah. If it's down for the week or down for the month. It's not down for, over the 50 years or whatever.
That's right.
So I think the challenge is you can know this stuff in the book and on paper, but you changing your behaviors around it. It's a challenge.
When you're already scared, that's already the most volatile emotional time is when you're flipping the switch from accumulation to drawdown. And then your financial advisor or, the book says, hey, by the way, add this complexity. Yeah. Most people who work with me as a financial planner moving into retirement, this is funny. I'll actually say, hey, let's start doing these advanced principles and tactics, maybe a couple years into retirement rather than right away. The simplicity might be worth a lot more than the tax savings, at least for a few years, right? So I do think that as you're learning, there's 38 chapters or whatever, right? I would say a lot of people think they have to do every single tactic to have a successful retirement. And I would just say that maintaining your desired lifestyle and simplicity are way at the top of prioritization for, pre or early retiree. Whereas tax optimization is maybe 3 or 4 down that list.
Yeah. And let me pull out one of the examples in here. And this is one of the ones that I don't know, it bothers me randomly. And it's the backdoor Roth. And the reason it bothers me is there's a bunch of steps you have to get exactly right to do this.
For $7,000 or $8,000.
Right. Yeah. And they're for $7,000, 8, whatever it is. And I'm going, you saw this on some financial whatever podcast.
Right.
I
you
can
have
do
to
this.
do this.
And this year wasn't as bad, but last year I spent more time with clients fixing. They didn't find the 606, or they didn't have a clean IRA, or they didn't do the rollover. And I'm like, this looks like a cool tactic, but I'm almost at a point with backdoor Roths. I'm like, don't do it without somebody looking over your shoulder. And it's just because you can mess it up. And now it takes a boatload of work to fix, and there may or may not be penalties.
Right. And it also, as you see, what's funny, you mentioned that even if it's like the simplest version and everything goes right, you're like, well, what's the difference between having that 7,000 a Roth IRA versus 7,000 in a taxable brokerage account, which has incredible benefits? Like, I kind of consider it's like the Roth IRA Junior, right? It's like, it's slightly less beneficial than a Roth account. But yeah, I think you're right that I've seen it all the time where even, let's say they have no pre-tax IRA balances, right? They contribute after tax to this account. They do what should be a tax-free Roth conversion. They go into the software, or they just send that 1099, that 1099-R to their tax professional. The professional typically doesn't ask the right questions. And what's really fascinating is not only is it kind of done wrong, that they might end up making you pay taxes on income you didn't have by saying that conversion had been deductible in a previous year when it hadn't. So they end up saying, hey, I'm going to make a contribution, do a tax-free Roth conversion, and then the tax professional or the software makes it a taxable distribution, which might even have a 10% penalty, as if you took it in early retirement. And yeah, I would say that if you don't fully understand not just how it works, but actually how the reporting should work on Form 8606, that either hire a professional or maybe just consider, we even have a chapter in the book called Return on Hassle, ROH, that some of these things, especially, let's say you're making $500,000 a year, going through all these hoops to put $7,000 extra in a Roth IRA might not be worth the hassle.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part is people are like, I want to optimize. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's optimize the big stuff, get you 80 or 90% of the advantage, and then go, is the other stuff really worth it? So I had somebody's CPA call me and just rip me a new one because I hadn't set up somebody's traditional IRA. And it was an elderly folks. They actually still working, kind of interesting. And he called me probably 4 times, which, by the way, a CPA calling you 4 times is really odd. But he's calling me. He's like, should I just send him to another advisor down the street to set this up? I'm like, listen, I have a list of 2-page list of things we're working through with this client. That IRA is on the list, but it is so far down there that
disability insurance, life insurance, estate planning. Yeah.
They were going through long-term care issues and trying to take care of their loved one and selling a business. And I'm like, you know what you can do with your IRA? For the $7,000. And this is where he is correct. Hey, there's a tax opportunity here. And I was like, you are correct. I meet with this client every month. I've been working through the list. We've gone from 2 pages down to 1.5 that we have to get to. We will get to it, I promise.
Right.
But there's bigger things going on. And he goes, well, I didn't know that. And I'm like, I know that. And he goes, well, just start the IRA. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to lose my mind. Yeah. But you can see how people get stuck on this.
Well, I'll add to that. What's funny in the book, I just found in the book, we have Sean has a take. He says, think about the necessity of these tactics. He says, in this example, would you disrupt a year-end Hawaii vacation to do a backdoor Roth conversion? No, spit, put your feet on the sand. Right. And by the way, just a little extra tactic there. You can contribute to an IRA until April 15th, the tax filing deadline of the next year. So if you're worried last minute at the end of the year, first of all, don't disrupt your Hawaiian vacation to do this thing. Maybe not at all. But if you do, maybe wait until the early next year when you're back in town and you can really have a thoughtful conversation about it with your professional.
Yep. So let's shift just a little. And I want to give you a couple case components of child-free folks and think about how it changes your answers. So in the back of the book, you've got a kind of a chapter, kind of a critique a little bit. And you call out that some of the things in here won't exactly fit single people. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I guess, do you have a specific example? I guess in terms of fitting single people, I would say one thing, of course, is the, compressed, your tax bracket, certainly the lower standard deduction, additional standard deduction, the new senior deduction. There's an age difference. We do talk Social Security is a big one of, hey, who's which spouse's Social Security do we claim at what age, and how does that affect our tax planning depending on our age gap. Like I've worked with clients who, one spouse in their 50s, one in their 70s, right? That really changes the game on, longevity and things that could definitely affect, the difference between single filers. None specifically come to mind in that chapter, but anything top of mind for you?
I think the challenge for single folks is A, they don't have somebody else to back them up. B, the brackets have gotten kind of tight.
Right.
And you are most worried about your own finances, in our case, not necessarily somebody else.
Right.
And this is where we start talking about estate planning and all that. So let me give you a simple example for child-free people as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Child-free people as a whole, I don't recommend being a landlord and owning property. And the reason is because you don't do a 1031 exchange and then pass on to the next generation, get a step up in basis, and all the tax disappears.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like whether it's community property, whatever, it's like, hey, you don't have you might not have a, surviving spouse or dependent that you're really needs your sufficiency moving forward.
Or that planning for anything for step up in basis really helps you as a single person, because it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Somebody's going to get that money, but it might even be charitable, which doesn't need a step up to begin with.
Well, this is where we go to charitable. So a lot of child-free folks, we just did another podcast came out on this about giving with a warm hand versus giving with a cold hand. We try to do a lot of charitable giving during life because then you get the tax benefits.
Right.
And one of the topics, and I didn't remember seeing this in the book, but it might have been somewhere you got 350 pages. I might have missed it. But I've been talking to a lot of child-free people about doing CRUTs.
Mm-hmm.
Because the bonus of a CRUT, so this is a charitable remainder unit trust, is you give the money to charity and you're like, hey, whatever's left over when I die goes to charity.
Right.
And you live off the income of that for the rest of your life. Now, it's not always income, it could be capital gains, it can be a mix.
Right.
But what I love it for is people in their last year of work, they've got a good earning year, got a good bonus, maybe got to hit an RSU, and we give appreciated stock into a CRUT, get that tax benefit this year, and then literally you can die with zero because you're just living off that income from the CRUT, and you're like, this is awesome.
Right. Yeah.
How does that feel to you? Because that's not one that one doesn't fit, the standard life script as much, but for child-free people, it seems to be a good opportunity.
Yeah, I think the big difference there, we do talk about donor advised funds, which is doing that, but without creating an income source coming back to you, right? I think that's incredibly important, because I do think that when we talk about charitable giving, it's usually focused on the single year or, donor advised fund we're looking at very limited, charitable giving. We're looking at maybe 5 to 10 years at the most of charitable giving. Whereas you're talking about, again, this can, also happen with married folks, with or without kids. But yeah, definitely in your case, the CRUT, we didn't mention that because it's kind of on the tails of, what we have experience with. But I think that's definitely a big concept to consider. I actually thought about, I think it was, the guy who, founded and sold CD Baby. He has a few books out there. And what he did is, in those big income years, he's, whenever you sold a business, or like you said, you're in your final year of working, or you get that big, that RSU from work, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a big chunk of income. I don't need most of this. And by the way, I'm planning to give to charity in my lifetime and upon my death. Why don't I just stack that now? And I think that there are some limitations to using things like just giving straight to charity, donor advised funds. They have AGI limitations on, the deductibility of those contributions. But I think the CRUT definitely makes a lot more sense for those who are saying, hey, I'm legacy minded in my charitable giving, not just during life. Because as you mentioned, you are making a decision that, hey, you can't just say, oh, by the way, actually, I want that money to provide security for my spouse, right? Or for my dependent child moving forward. That's more of I wouldn't say necessarily, I don't know all the details, but it's more of a permanent legacy decision than something like a donor advised fund that's more just a few, just kind of, let's just test this out a few years at a time.
Well, and where I'm going is, it's just one example, and I just picked a random one just to kind of go through it, of hey, the 1031 exchange and step up in basis for child-free people, nope, not going to be a winner. The CRUT, ooh, that's got some options. And I think that's the challenge. So I was talking to somebody else. This was on the estate planning side. And we were talking about trust. And I saw you have a chapter in there on trust and if you need them and all that. And I've had a lot of folks say to me, well, I don't have a big estate. I don't need a trust. Well, and the issue is most trusts, all trusts have a purpose. And most trust purpose is to protect the money for the next generation. Now, for child-free people, I'm like, no, the trust is there to protect you, to make sure your wishes while you're alive are followed, and your money's managed and all of that to go with it. Oh, yeah, and everything left over goes to, charity or people or whoever you want it to go to. And it's these type of like weird things, like the system just breaks. And what happens is, in particular with tax planning, if we swing back to that, it's kind of like the same example with the trust. Like if you have these assumptions that it's used for this purpose and you try to fit it to a child-free person, it just doesn't work. If you have the assumption in your brain, like if I went to most tax planners, CFPs, CPAs, whatever, I'm willing to bet they have an assumption about step up in basis being a good thing in general. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't work here.
Right. Or if maybe if the niece is getting the money. Yeah.
Well, but it may, but even then, if you're trying to die with zero and you're trying to spend down your wealth.
Right.
If you're planning on a step up in basis, you made a mistake.
Yeah. I think a lot of people get caught up in I guess not caught up in the idea that there are only 4 parties that are going to spend your money. Right. It's you, right? Your family and friends, your charitable organizations, or the government. Right. I think a lot of times, like, people kind of miss that, hey, like, there's only 4 parties that are going to spend your money. And I think one thing that you mentioned in terms of estate planning being different for child-free or, single as well, is that, yeah, I think you're right that most of us think of estate planning as who gets what when I die. But in reality is who does what while I'm living and after I die. Right. It's more about who does what than who gets what. I mean, I know that you can certainly do both of those in a trust, but everybody talks about wills. Like, do you have a will? Right. But I think powers of attorney, just like you talk about, disability insurance is a lot more important than life insurance. By the way, that's another reason it's more expensive. It's because it's more likely and more expensive, but also powers of attorney and those trusts and things like that, really having direction of who does what, not just who gets what, is actually more important than, like, again, you can do who gets what with beneficiary designations, with account titling, like things that are outside of drafting documents. Anytime you make a note in an article, I know you're in like hundreds of articles now and you write your own, you have a podcast. Like, I love that you're giving us unique things to think about. Cause again, if I'm working with a childless couple, like, I need to be learning from somebody like you, or simply refer them to you, because like I either have a job to learn more about how to serve them more as a fiduciary. There's a quote I use, by the way, which is, to provide advice in somebody's best interest, you first have to understand their interest. And it's not just understand, but you need the education around how do their interests differ in terms of the advice you provide. So again, just a little kind of a wave to you and think, like, I love the way you educate and also challenge us to say, hey, like, things are, the first time you say things are different for child-free, childless couples, most, or your clients, most financial planners are like, I don't really think so. Like, they're not that different, right? But like, and then as they read your books, as they see your articles, are like, well, this is like, again, even charitable giving completely changes when you're making more like permanent legacy decisions than just saying, well, I'm going to give some to charity, but I still need some for my surviving spouse and my kid moving forward.
Yeah, and we're on the same page. And shameless plug, that's actually why we started Child Free Trust, so that we can be child-free people's power of attorney executive trustee. All right, so Cody, I'm going to ask you the hardest question I ask any author, and we're going to wrap up with this. So somebody picks up your book and they only learn one thing from it. What would you want that to be?
That taxes aren't something to fear. They're something to plan around. I think you see so much commentary around taxes. You're going to get crushed by taxes. The government's going to take over half your money, right? All these things that they might have taken like one quantitative example and then just like blew it up. There's even a lot of big words. You hear about the tax bombs, tax traps, like we even use the word tax penalty, which the IRS calls an additional tax. Like, we have added language to make, and I think it's mostly political. I think it's mostly, I think ignorance plus political bias, like, really creates like a bad formula for doing tax planning. So I would say the number one thing is, have no fear that not only can taxes be planned around, but also kind of the irony is there's a lot of fear around taxes. But we even looked in the book at tons of areas that taxes are most beneficial for the retiree. So when people are the most scared about money and scared about taxes is actually when, again, I'm not going to say like certain parties. You've actually, in the book, we have a chapter that shows actually, both parties both major parties have actually improved taxes for retirees over the last decade plus. Again, I know you asked for one thing, but it's have no fear. But also, when you're planning for tax optimization, like I said earlier, optimizing the top 5 to 10% of your finances is not going to make or break your retirement planning, but it's just going to enhance. And by the way, it's one of those things where it gives you more. The more you optimize for taxes, the more you can really give and spend in ways that align more with your values. By the way, if you like specific ways the government does spend money, maybe you can give more money to those specific areas. Like, I'm a big fan of charitable giving, but in a way that actually kind of gets closer to you. Like, as you know, like giving more locally and tangible giving, ways, whether, time, energy, financial resources, I think is a lot more impactful than just like, thinking globally, maybe, paying more taxes to the federal government. I like paying taxes, but I don't like tipping the IRS. My wife and I actually discussed yesterday, every month we're each going to choose a new charitable organization to give money to every month. And we're going to have a meeting every month to say, hey, like, what do we care about right now? Like, what do we deeply care about and what's top of mind? And let's find a charitable organization, maybe even local to us, that has more of a tangible impact than giving maybe to some of these federal or global initiatives.
Well, great. So where can they find you? Where can they get the book?
Sure. So the easiest place is measuretwicemoney.com/book. That'll give you the link to both the paperback and Kindle versions of the book. There's also a downloadable table of contents. So if you want to see, like, what are all these 38 chapters they're talking about, and which one of these topics would apply to my life. Also, just a fun thing on YouTube. So Dr. J, you inspired me. You recorded real client meetings. I think you've done this like for a few years now. It's amazing that you put your real financial planning meetings on YouTube, show the public, hey, we talk about what we do all the time. We talk about how valuable we are as financial advisors, but there are like literally just a handful of financial planners who actually show their work in public. So I'll just say that if you want to see, again, Dr. J, your videos are out there on the public to watch real financial planning meetings. You inspired me. I have 3 different case studies on the Measure Twice Money YouTube channel. If you want to watch my meeting with more traditional, retirees like Jamie, who's in her early 60s. She's single, moving into retirement. We also have 2 married couples, kind of in that 60s, kind of more traditional case study. So I love that kind of they can learn more from the traditional, the life script in my videos, and then learn more about the child-free, childless scripts in your videos.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available, or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Child Free Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available, or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Child Free Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.